The first time I heard about Delbert Raines, I was sitting in the Fayette County Historical Society reading room in Fayetteville, West Virginia, working through a stack of oral history transcripts from the 1970s documentation project that the Society had conducted with elderly residents of the county's former mining communities. I had been reading transcripts for 3 days. Most of them were what oral history transcripts tend to be: valuable social documentation, sometimes moving, occasionally surprising, rarely the kind of thing that stops you mid-page and makes you put the document down for a moment before you continue reading. The Raines transcript stopped me mid-page 3 times. Delbert Raines was 81 years old when he gave the interview in October 1978 to a graduate student named Patricia Lowe, who was conducting field work for her dissertation on the social history of Fayette County's coal communities. He had been born in 1897 in the Oak Hill area of Fayette County, had worked the mines from the age of 14 to the age of 58, and had spent the last 23 years of his working life, from 1941 to 1964, in the specific role of mine reclamation inspector for the West Virginia Department of Mines, a position that required him to enter, assess, and document the conditions of abandoned mine properties across the Fayette County area. He had, in that role, spent more time inside and around the county's abandoned mine infrastructure than any other living person by the time Patricia Lowe sat down across from him with her tape recorder in 1978. He had been everywhere. He had seen everything. And he had, for 14 years since his retirement, been trying to find the right person to tell what he had observed in 23 years of reclamation inspection work. The specific, documented, methodically recorded observations that had accumulated in his personal notebooks over those years, and that his official reports had consistently, deliberately, and for reasons he explained to Lowe with a clarity that I found bracing, failed to mention. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. Delbert Raines spent 23 years entering the abandoned mine infrastructure of Fayette County, West Virginia. He kept 2 sets of notes. He told me, through his transcript, why. I want to know where you are sitting when you hear what the official notes left out. Fayette County, West Virginia, occupies a section of the New River Gorge country that was among the most intensively mined regions in the eastern United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The coal seams underlying Fayette County were accessible, high quality, and connected to the eastern markets by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, and the result was a concentration of mine operations in the New River Gorge drainage that left, when the economic logic of extraction shifted in the mid-20th century, one of the densest concentrations of abandoned mine infrastructure in the Appalachian region. Shafts, adits, drift mines, the associated surface structures of tipples and preparation plants and company housing, the physical residue of 60 years of industrial coal extraction spread across the gorge walls and ridgelines of the county, slowly being reclaimed by the second-growth forest and by the processes of structural deterioration that make abandoned mine properties among the most hazardous terrain in the region. Raines had been entering that terrain since 1941. It is worth pausing on what mine reclamation inspection actually required of a man in that period, because the specificity of the work is relevant to the credibility of what Raines observed. A reclamation inspector's job was not a desk job, and it was not a job that allowed him to stand at the entrance of a property and assess it from a safe distance. The work required entry. It required going into structures that had not been maintained since the operations that built them had ceased. Shafts that had been standing unventilated for 10, 20, 30 years, their timbering degraded by water and by the slow, continuous movement of the ground around them, their air quality unmeasured and unmaintained, their structural integrity dependent on the care of operators who were no longer paying attention. The state inspector who entered those structures was doing so with the equipment available to a government employee in 1940s West Virginia, which was not sophisticated. A safety lamp, a notebook, 45 years of experience in what mine environments were supposed to feel and sound and smell like, and the professional confidence that came from those years. That was the toolkit. Raines had been going into abandoned mines with that toolkit, alone, across Fayette County since the autumn of 1941. Rains had been entering that terrain since 1941. His reclamation inspection role required him to assess abandoned properties for structural hazards, drainage issues, and the general physical condition that determined what remediation work, if any, the state would require the responsible operator to perform. He was, by the account given to Lowe, good at the work, thorough, methodical, with the physical confidence of a man who had worked underground since 14 and had developed the specific sensory vocabulary that mine work requires. He knew what a shaft smelled like when the air balance was right and when it was wrong. He knew what the timbering sounded like under load and what it sounded like when the load had shifted. He knew the difference between the ordinary acoustic properties of an underground space and the acoustic properties of an underground space where something was happening that warranted attention. It was that knowledge, the specific professional knowledge of how mine environments should sound, that made the observations he kept in his private notebook significant in a way that the same observations from a less experienced person would not have been. Rains told Lowe that he had begun keeping two separate sets of notes approximately 18 months into his reclamation inspection work in the autumn of 1942. He described the decision to his interviewer in terms that were matter of fact rather than dramatic. He had been conducting an inspection of an abandoned drift mine in the Loop Creek drainage in September 1942 and had heard a sound in the sealed interior section of the mine that he could not account for by any of the standard explanations available to a man with his experience. He had noted the sound in his personal notebook. He had not noted it in his official inspection report, because noting it in the official report would have required him to categorize it, and the available categories, structural, acoustic, animal, did not fit what he had heard. He chose not to categorize something he could not categorize. He recorded it privately and moved on. Over the following 22 years, he made 67 additional private notebook entries describing sounds in abandoned mine environments that he could not categorize by the standard explanations available to him. The entries span the full period of his inspection work and cover properties across the full range of Fayette County's former mine country, the New River Gorge properties, the Lou Creek drainage, the mine properties in the Paint Creek and Cabin Creek areas. The sounds are not all the same. Rains was careful about this in his interview, and Lowe's transcript records the care with which he distinguished between different types of observations. Some of the 67 entries describe sounds he classified as acoustic, sounds produced by structural movement, gas release, water, or the specific reverberation properties of certain underground geometries, sounds he had explained to himself even if not to his satisfaction. The entries he considered unexplained are a subset of the 67. He told Lowe the number. The number is in the transcript. Patricia Lowe's interview transcript runs to 47 pages in the Historical Society's file. The section on the private notebooks begins on page 23 and continues to page 31, 8 pages devoted to Rains's careful description of his unexplained observations. This is a significant portion of a 47-page transcript, and it tells you something about both the interviewer and the subject. Lowe was attentive enough to pursue the subject in depth when Rains introduced it, and Rains had enough organized thought about it to fill 8 pages of transcript without repetition or rambling. He had been waiting to tell someone for 14 years. He knew what he wanted to say. He said it methodically, with the same economy of language that his official inspection reports apparently demonstrated, without preamble or dramatization. The notebook entries themselves were not available for Lowe to review during the interview. Rains had them at his home, and the interview was conducted at the Historical Society. But he had organized his recollection of them with enough precision that his description of their content is detailed rather than general, specific rather than impressionistic. He described the geographic distribution of the observations across the county's former mine properties. He described the temporal pattern that he had identified, the seasonal concentration, the time of day pattern. He described the evolution of his thinking about what he was observing over 23 years, from the initial single observation in 1942 to the organized, cross-referenced understanding he had arrived at by the time of his retirement in 1964. He was not a man who had been frightened once in a mine and built a mythology around it. He was a man who had conducted 68 separate observations over 23 years, and had organized them into a pattern that he was prepared to describe in specific, verifiable terms to a graduate student with a tape recorder in 1978. The sounds in the unexplained subset share several features, which Raines described to Lowe with the methodical specificity of a man who has been organizing his observations for a very long time and knows exactly what he wants to say. They occur at the sealed interior sections of mines, the sections where the accessible portion of the workings has been gated or blocked, beyond which the mine's deeper infrastructure continues without ventilation, without lighting, without any form of human access or maintenance. They occur in a pattern he described as not random, not evenly distributed across the inspection calendar, but concentrated in particular seasons and within seasons at particular times of day, early morning and full dark, the transition hours. He had noted this pattern in his private notebooks as early as 1945 and had tracked it consistently enough across subsequent years to regard it as documented rather than speculative. He described the sounds themselves to Lowe, and his description is the section of the transcript that stopped me mid-page the first time. He said, "People ask me what it sounds like, and I tell them it's not one sound, it's a class of sounds. What they have in common is that they are not mechanical, not settling, not gas movement, not water. The sounds that come from water or from structural settling have a regularity to them that you learn after years underground. These don't have that. They have the quality of, and I have thought a long time about how to say this so it means something, rather than sounding like what a frightened man says, they have the quality of intention. I do not mean supernatural intention. I mean the quality of a sound that is being produced rather than the quality of a sound that is occurring. The difference between a tree falling and a tree being pushed. I have been underground for 45 years. I know the difference. The quality of intention, produced rather than occurring." He was 81 years old when he said this, with 45 years of underground experience, and he said it in the flat, specific tone of a man making a technical distinction rather than a dramatic claim. Lowe asked him why he had not included these observations in his official inspection reports over 23 years of work. His answer occupies approximately 200 words in the transcript and is worth reading in full if you can access the Fayette County Historical Society reading room, but the core of it is this. He had made a judgment early in his inspection career that including observations he could not categorize in official state documents would serve no productive purpose and would undermine the credibility of the technical assessments those documents contained. He was a state inspector producing documents that would be used to make remediation decisions about real properties. He was not a researcher documenting anomalous phenomena. The two roles required different things of him, and he had chosen to discharge his official role fully and keep his personal observations separate. This was a professional judgment, not a concealment. He had made it consciously, he said, and he did not regret it. But he had retired 14 years ago, and the observations were in the notebooks, and he had been looking for someone to give them to since 1964. He gave them to Patricia Lowe in October 1978. The notebooks, 11 in total, covering the full 23-year period of his inspection work, were donated to the Fayette County Historical Society along with the transcript of the interview after Raines's death in 1981. They are in the Society's collection. They have not been published. They have been referenced in one article in a West Virginia oral history journal, which mentions the Raines interview in the context of a broader discussion of coal community oral histories and describes the notebook donation without addressing the specific content of the personal observations. The article was published in 1989. No subsequent researcher has published an account of the notebook's content. Raines was asked at the end of the interview whether he had ever told anyone else about what he had heard in the mines during his inspection years, colleagues, family members, other former miners. He said that he had told his wife in 1955, 13 years into the observation period. He said she had listened and had asked one question, whether he was afraid when he heard the sounds. He said he had told her no, he was not afraid. He was professionally obligated to complete his inspections regardless of what he heard, and fear had not been a useful response to that obligation, so he had not allowed it. He said his wife had thought about this for a moment and had then said, "That's the most frightening thing you've said to me in 30 years of marriage." He said he had understood what she meant, but that he had been unable to disagree with the professional judgment he had made. He said this without visible emotion, in the flat, specific tone that characterized the entire interview. He was 81 years old, and he had been carrying 67 private notebook entries for 36 years, and he had organized them for someone to receive. And the someone had arrived, and he was telling her what they contained, carefully and completely, in the way that a man tells things he has been waiting to tell for a very long time. The mines he inspected are sealed now, most of them, gated, backfilled, reclaimed to varying degrees by the West Virginia land management programs that continued after his retirement. The Lou Creek mine, where he made his first unexplained observation in September 1942, is within the New River Gorge National Park, which was established in 1978, the same year as Raines's interview, and which now manages the former mine properties as part of a landscape that receives hundreds of thousands of recreational visitors per year. The sealed sections of those mines are not accessible to visitors. The park's interpretive materials describe the mining history of the New River Gorge with the careful, respectful tone that national parks use for industrial heritage. They do not mention the observations in Raines's 11 notebooks. The notebooks are in Fayetteville, in the Historical Society reading room, in a box with the transcript of the interview Patricia Lowe conducted in October 1978. Here is the question that Delbert Raines leaves behind, and it is in two parts. The first part is about the sounds themselves, and I want you to hold the specific quality of who was doing the describing before you answer it. Raines was not a credulous man. He was not a man who frightened easily, by his own account and by the nature of a career that required him to enter, alone, the sealed and deteriorating interior sections of abandoned coal mines for 23 years. He was a man with 45 years of underground experience who had developed the specific sensory vocabulary that experience produces. He described what he heard as having the quality of intention, produced rather than occurring, and he distinguished it carefully and explicitly from the standard acoustic phenomena he had encountered throughout his career. He was 81 years old, and he organized his observations carefully for someone to receive, and he told them to Patricia Lowe without drama or embellishment in October 1978. And then he donated the notebooks, and then he died in 1981, and the notebooks have been in Fayetteville for 43 years. Do you believe him? That is the first part of the question, not whether what he heard is explainable. It may well be explainable, and the explanation may be entirely ordinary. Do you believe that he heard what he said he heard and described it accurately and organized his notebooks honestly? Because if you believe that, the second part of the question follows from it. The second part is this: 67 private notebook entries accumulated over 23 years, describing sounds in the sealed sections of Fayette County's abandoned mines that a man with 45 years of underground experience classified as unexplained. The notebooks are accessible. Nobody has published them. Nobody has taken them to a physicist or an acoustic engineer or a geologist with the specific question Raines's observations imply. The park interpretive materials describe the mining history. The sealed sections are sealed. The transition hours, early morning and full dark, come every day over the New River Gorge. What do you think is in those sealed sections? Tell me in the comments. Tell me whether you think Raines was describing something that has an ordinary explanation that his particular experience and vocabulary led him to mischaracterize, or whether you think he was describing something that the official category system of a state mine inspector had no language for the same reason that it has no language now. If these oral histories and private notebooks and the observations that experienced men kept separate from their official records are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. The notebooks are in Fayetteville. The Society's reading room is accessible to researchers. Patricia Lowe's transcript is in the box with them. Raines said the sounds have the quality of intention. He said this carefully, with 45 years behind it, and he was not afraid when he heard them. There is one final element of the Raines transcript that belongs in this account, which is the exchange at the very end of the recorded interview, after Lowe had concluded her formal questions and the tape was still running. She asked him, in what the transcript describes as a more personal tone than she had used for the formal interview questions, whether he thought anyone would do anything with the notebooks after he was gone. He was quiet for a moment. He said he thought someone would find them useful eventually. He said he was not in a position to say what they would find useful, because what he had documented was a set of observations without a conclusion, and what someone would need to do with the observations was supply the curiosity and the analytical capacity to find the conclusion, and he could not predict whether the right person would arrive. He said, "I am 81 years old. I've been underground since I was 14. I've been above ground and looking at abandoned mines since 1941. The one thing I know with certainty about what is in those sealed sections is that whatever it is has been there for a long time, and it is not going anywhere. Whenever the right person arrives, it will still be there." He paused. Then he said, "I hope they bring the right equipment." Lowe asked what he meant by the right equipment. He said he was not sure, but that the lamp in the notebook had been sufficient for his purposes, which were documentation rather than understanding, and that whoever came after him with the purpose of understanding would need something more than that. The tape ran out 30 seconds later, on the ambient sound of the reading room. He was not afraid, because fear was not a useful response to his professional obligation. That is either the most reassuring thing in this account or the most disturbing one. I want to know in the comments which one it is for you.